Government collapsed, civil war in Syria reignited, and South Korea's president briefly declared martial law. But here in Washington, Donald Trump's brand of political chaos is a world unto itself. Trump revealed perhaps his most dangerous decision yet, a plan to install Kash Patel, an ostentatious Trump loyalist who has explicitly promised to go after Trump's political enemies in the press and in both parties as the next director of the FBI. Susan writes, who exactly gets confirmed to what job may not yet be known, but this much looks more clear with each Trump appointment. Internal purges, far more than anything overseas, will be the order of the day in Trump 2.0. Susan, I'll let you expound a little more on your piece, but whether it's Kash Patel or Pete Hegseth or someone that is slightly more palatable to these senators, it seems you're right that Donald Trump, the grievance and everything he talked about on the campaign trail, the retribution will be carried out by whoever sits in those jobs.
Well, that's right. You know, we're focusing understandably on the controversial background and apparently unvetted nature of some of these appointees, Pete Hegseth being one example. So it's understandable that where investigative reporters are doing the hard work that it seems the Trump campaign itself did not do of figuring out just exactly who he's putting up for these jobs. The Secretary of Defense, I would point out, is, literally in the line of nuclear command and control. This is a very serious position. So it's not a distraction to focus on their personal issues. But I think more broadly, what are these controversies telling us about President Trump in his second term? And you see that the agenda of kind of revenge and retribution, almost a redefinition of America first. It's not just a foreign policy statement anymore. It's an idea about targeting enemies within. And I think that Trump himself was very clear about that. There's a really striking comment that didn't get as much attention as it could have in October before the election, where he basically said, we have two kinds of enemies. We have Russia and China, and then we have the enemy within. And I think that's the more dangerous one. And so to me, when you look at Kash Patel at the FBI or Pete Hegseth, a lot of what he's written and talked about in recent years, it's not about Russia and China. When he talks about being Pentagon chief, he's targeting America's own generals that he considers to be too focused on diversity and not focused enough on what he wants them to focus on. He's talking about the internal threats from the Pentagon and not the Pentagon's job of keeping America safe from external threats. And so I think that's the big picture here in all of this. But I agree with Jen in terms of her assessment right now. These senators don't want to be the ones to challenge Trump publicly on any one of these nominations, and just hope that somehow the process and the math gives them the ability not to have to make an uncomfortable public vote.
Jen, Susan's right. The stakes couldn't be higher, but it occurs to me the one useful role that Pete Hegseth is playing right now is he's taking up all the attention, he's taking up all the oxygen, allowing some of Trump's other controversial picks, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Kash Patel, to kind of go quietly unnoticed, for at least for the moment. And that allows them to be perhaps normalized and quietly build support. We played from sound from Senator Cornyn earlier in the morning, suggesting he believed that Kash Patel, who many feel is deeply unqualified and problematic, he thinks he'll get through without much of a problem, in part because senators can only say no so many times.
Well, maybe. But here's the thing. They're not saying no publicly, so it doesn't count on a chit against them necessarily. This is a process right now, and we'll see how many more this happens with, where there are quiet conversations among Republican members who are saying, we can't have this person in this job. I mean, if you look at, I know we keep talking about Pete Hegseth, but he is front and center right now. The Secretary of Defense role, Secretary Austin regularly has meetings right now where he's determining where to move forces and troops around the world and where to move resources. He is a person who sits at the table in international events and international meetings and negotiates with his counterparts and says, we can't give you that military equipment, we can't give you those planes, or you need to kind of step back and be more restrained in your military action. Can Pete Hegseth do that? I mean, I know my view is, but I think for a number of Republican senators, they're legitimately asking that question. I don't know that he is long for the last in this nomination. We will see. But I think the question is, who's next in terms of the target for quiet defiance? Is it Kash Patel? Is it Tulsi Gabbard? I think it's probably one of the two of them. And these hearings are not going to start until January. So to me, the next 2 weeks could be quite interesting. You're right, though. If you're Tulsi Gabbard or Kash Patel, you're delighted right now that all of the focus is on Pete Hegseth. But I do think that the way that it's working so far could work for a couple of additional nominees that there's discomfort, I think, on a bipartisan level about.
Morning Joe Weekend is back after a short break.
Once in a lifetime is never enough.
Never enough.
For all the joy, the love,
The warmth.
the brilliance. Diamonds, diamonds, diamonds. For all who love. Pandora, lab-grown diamonds.
We started to use Square as we moved from one location to two. We quickly realised that we needed better data so that we could customise the curation for each of the markets. Originally, we started with the KDS. By adding the Square Online for the full grocery offering, we hoped to grow sales about 20–25%. And we used the loyalty program, which has definitely generated a lot of repeat business. Since onboarding with Square, we've tripled the business. It's been fantastic.
I can tell you how much you spent on takeout, and it's a lot.
You can track my spending by category. 1, weird. 2, how.
1, no it's not, and 2, Rocket Money.
Go on.
It's a finance app that shows you all your accounts, bills, and subscriptions in one place, and it analyzes your spending habits to create a custom budget that works for even you.
I can do that too. I'll just look at my bank account, my credit cards. I have a spreadsheet I've been working on.
Yes, but Rocket Money does it for you. Find a subscription you no longer want? Rocket Money can cancel it in just a few taps.
You have my attention. How do I get in on this?
Download it today.
The government thought that showing the world separation, they would scare people that were attempting to come from coming.
It troubles me profoundly that it could happen again.
Welcome back to Morning Joe Weekend. Let's pick up with the conversation we were having just before the break.
It really has just been next level, though, in terms of how ridiculous the process can get. You know, Caddy, there are reports that Pete Hegseth's mother has been calling senators to lobby on his behalf. Can you think of any other cabinet position where the candidate's mother has called to rally the troops for her son?
I also felt, I don't know if you felt this too, Elise, but watching her on the Fox News interview, it looked kind of like a sort of hostage video. She looked so uncomfortable to be there, and maybe that's just because she's not used to being on television very much. But the whole thing feels incredibly awkward, and you say, next level. We haven't seen this kind of thing before. My question would be, Willie, at what point does Donald Trump feel he needs to kind of crack the whip and get Republican senators in line and show that he is the boss of the party again? Because you've now had Matt Gaetz going, you had the DEA pick from Florida going of his own accord. It's possible that Pete Hegseth doesn't make it. I mean, at what point does he say he needs to feel he has to show that he is reasserting control over Republican senators? How much of a leash do they have? So far, they seem to be able to push back against him. And I've heard from some who are thinking, you know, that they may not be around to run again, that they will continue to exercise that role of pushing back against the president, some of these Republican senators. But I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Donald Trump loses his patience and says, OK, I'm done now. This is it. You all fall into line.
Without question. I think we saw a glimmer of that when the DEA choice stepped aside, and Donald Trump quickly put out a statement saying he didn't step aside. I told him to step aside. He wants to show the public, at least, and his supporters, that he's in control of this process. On yesterday's show, we spoke with Politico's Jonathan Martin about his new reporting that the Biden White House is discussing preemptive pardons for those who might be the focus of potential revenge prosecution by Donald Trump's allies. This morning, the New York Times following up on J. Mart's report, adding that Democrats on Capitol Hill also have been pressing Mr. Biden to do what he can to protect targets of Mr. Trump. Among them, Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, one of the president's closest allies, who urged the White House to consider preemptive pardons shortly after Mr. Trump's election last month, and likewise recommended that the president pardon his son, Hunter. Congressman Clyburn telling the paper, "I think there are a lot of people who are coming into this next administration who are telling us who they are. I've seen Kash Patel saying who he's going after, and so why should we not believe them?" But as White House officials weigh the matter, they are concerned that such a move would fuel the impression spread in conservative media that the recipients actually had done something wrong. The Times goes on, at least some of those who would be obvious candidates for such pardons have said privately they would not want one because of such an implication. So, Susan Glasser, this is a sort of an odd one here, which is issuing blanket pardons to people who have not committed any crimes, but about whom you're concerned that Kash Patel or the Trump Justice Department or the FBI or whoever will go after. What's your take on this? It sounds like it's picking up some traction, but it also sounds like a lot of these people say, wait a minute, I don't want to have some admission, or at least the perception of admission, that I've done something wrong.
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, I've run into, in Washington this week, a couple of people who are on that Kash Patel enemies list. That's the appendix of 60 different names of what he calls deep state, quote unquote, executive branch people that he put in his last book, and, which is entitled Government Gangsters, and, is an extraordinary document to exist for a prospective head of the FBI. And so there's a real concern. I think the threat to these folks and potentially, by the way, to members of the press is very real. I think there are numerous ways in which, if you're determined to use the tools of the government, including the vast powers in the FBI, you could really go after people, and impugn their name.